Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. The Anti-Money Laundering Council flags two Philippine business bank accounts linked to Congressmen Tirso Edwin Guardiola and Romeo Momo in the flood control corruption probe. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. waives interest on unpaid PhilHealth contributions. The Bureau of Customs misses its 2025 revenue target amid lower import volumes and global commodity price volatility. And Cubans brace for further hardship as U.S. pressure on Venezuela tightens oil supplies. The Anti-Money Laundering Council flags two Philippine business bank accounts jointly held by Construction Workers Solidarity Party List Representative Tirso Edwin Guardiola and Surigao del Sur Representative Romeo Salazar Momo as part of the expanding flood control corruption controversy. Documents obtained by Bilyonaryo.com show the AMLC says that these accounts with Torreja Construction Corporation President Dionisio Torreja, listed as a third signatory, are included in more than 1,000 frozen accounts linked to Guardiola and his associated firms. The AMLC also says that the two Philippine business bank accounts form part of Guardiola's 55 personal accounts, with a combined transaction value of 7.024 billion pesos. Now, the AMLC also freezes joint bank accounts linked to S.Ang Construction and General Trading Incorporated, owned by Guardiola. Documents obtained by Bilyonaryo.com show that two of the frozen accounts are jointly held with Esquire Financing Incorporated, a non-bank lender founded by Rajan Uttamchandani. Another account is linked to Indian money changer Chandani Prakash Jensiam Das. The AMLC says a total of 325 accounts were frozen, handling 255.5 billion pesos in transactions flagged as suspicious from 2010 to 2025, with S.Ang receiving 62 flood control project awards over the past 3 years. Esquire Financing has, however, since said that it is not a party to any wrongdoing and is cooperating with the authorities. The company adds that an official statement will be issued soon. Now, from frozen accounts to specific transactions, the AMLC now flags transactions linking Newington Builders Incorporated, associated with Guardiola, and St. Timothy Construction Corporation, owned by Curly and Sara Discaya, to the multi-billion peso flood control controversy. Documents obtained by Bilyonaryo.com show the AMLC says St. Timothy made on us check deposits to Newington totaling 78.772 million pesos in 2023 and in 2024. The AMLC also says Newington reported 205.98 billion pesos in transactions from 2021 to 2025, while St. Timothy posted 48.3 billion pesos, with the Independent Commission for Infrastructure recommending charges against Guardiola and other alleged contractors. Now, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas extends regulatory incentives for banks financing green or sustainable projects for 2 more years, a move that makes it easier and cheaper for capital to flow into renewable energy, climate-resilient infrastructure, and low-carbon projects across the Philippines. The BSP says banks may increase loans and guarantees for eligible green projects by up to 15% of net worth, while the reserve requirement on sustainable bonds remains waived, freeing up more balance sheet capacity for long-term climate and infrastructure financing. Data shows total green, social, sustainability, and other sustainability-linked bonds issuance reached an estimated 515.9 billion pesos in the first half of 2025, underscoring growing investor demand and positioning as the Philippines as an active player in sustainable finance in the region. Healthcare spending surges as PhilHealth rolls out bigger support, one of the largest expansions of public health financing in recent years. Benefit payouts jumped to over 289 billion pesos in 2025, a 76% increase from the previous year, signaling a sharp rise in financial assistance for PhilHealth members nationwide. But despite the increase, PhilHealth President and CEO Edwin Mercado says payouts are still not enough, pointing to continuing gaps in healthcare coverage and access, especially outside major urban centers. To address these gaps, PhilHealth is shifting to a new payment system, stepping up hospital and clinic assessments and strengthening its internal capacity as it works to deliver more consistent and reliable care for Filipinos. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. orders a one-time PhilHealth interest waiver, a move aimed at getting more employers and self-employed Filipinos back into the system as the government tries to expand health coverage and improve collections. The amnesty covers interest on unpaid PhilHealth premiums from 2013 to 2024, with around 300,000 employers expected to benefit. The president says the move is meant to ease the burden of monthly contributions and remove a key barrier that has kept some workers and employers out of compliance.
Alam naman namin na yung 3% na binabayad para sa PhilHealth medyo na buwan-buwan ay ramdam ng ating mga kababayan. Kaya gagawa po tayo at inutusan ko po ang PhilHealth. Gagawa tayo ditong taon na ito, 2026, ang tinatawag naming one-time waiver para sa interest ngayong taon 2026.
Marcos also urges employers to enroll workers in the YAKAP program, which offers free checkups, lab tests, and cancer screenings, as well as up to 20,000 pesos a year for maintenance medicines. Now, what stands out right now in the business community is no longer the scandals, it's the economic reactions to them. Investigations into public projects have disrupted public spending and project execution at a time when the economy was counting on domestic demand to carry growth. Despite low inflation, strong remittances, and easing interest rates, businesses are delaying projects, factories are slowing output, and the government has lowered its growth targets for 2026 through to 2028. In effect, the economy is acting as if confidence has been withdrawn without a major global shock and without a policy error on paper. The question now is whether this is a short-term freeze while accountability plays out or a longer period where uncertainty becomes built into how decisions are made. Joining us this morning is Victor Andres Manhit, the founder and CEO of the Strat-based group, a political strategist who analyzes how governance and political risk shape economic behavior. Hi, Dindo. Good morning, and thanks for being here with us.
Good morning, Maiki.
Okay, so Dindo, let's talk about where we stand at this current junction. Estimates are growth in the fourth quarter are going to come in at about 4.6%, and that's already boosted by holiday spending. It's still, however, below the 5% plus rate that the government was targeting. How are business leaders, how's the business community reading this moment? Is it a short-term pause, or is it a longer-term, something more lasting?
I hope it's a short-term pause, given the political noise that we have experienced since the SONA end of July, and the investigations, the coverage. It really affects business and investor confidence.
Yeah.
But data like the Bangko Sentral data on business expectation, they seem to be upbeat towards the end of the year. That means things could be better. No? There's this hopefulness that I feel.
That's the hope. The hope that things will get better. But beginning the third quarter of 2025, we saw that investment initiatives were put on hold because of the corruption noise. Tell us about where we are now, where you see the Philippine economy at this junction.
There is that perception that investments were put on hold. Again, in Strat-based, we focus on data. And data released by the Board of Investment, of course, this has not actually translated into actual investment, but at least approval for investments.
Yeah.
I think it's in their 57-year history, it's the second highest. They missed their target, and it was a growth trajectory from 2024, hopefully.
Yeah.
So that means we basically caused our own investment confidence problem. That means we are on track. Government, on the part of the investment side of government, is doing their part. But the political noise might have slowed down towards a third or fourth
Yeah,
quarter.
we need to generate that confidence again. So you're talking about the Board of Investments data for 2025. Total investments reached 1.56 trillion pesos. Now, it's important to note that this is the second highest on record after 2024. It's 1.62 trillion pesos. That's just a 4% difference. If not for the corruption noise, this could have been 2025 could have been a record year.
That is the point that I'd like to make. Imagine hitting the highest at 2024. We could have hit a higher target. Maybe that's why they became ambitious in 2025. Because there are enough legislations, laws to really generate investment in the country. So maybe it's a wake-up call also to the political establishment, a wake-up call also to the rest of Philippine society that maybe we need to move forward because investment translates into jobs. And in reality also, corruption affects economic data.
It's a governance issue, yeah, and it affects business because it affects confidence. You know, that's the thing. We're talking so much about corruption that we're stuck in politics and we're not moving forward. When you look at another data point, the PEZA, Philippine Economic Zone Authority, they surpassed its 25 billion peso investment target for 2025, and they're looking at 300 billion for 2026, defying the odds despite the global headwinds and the local challenges. What does this data tell you, Dindo?
Again, it's good that we talk about this data because nobody talks about this data, which is a reality, not commentaries, not punditry. But this data reflects actual investment inside their economic zones. Jobs are being created, income are being earned by our people, and as they earn income, consumption happens, which drives growth in our country. So if we can only focus our efforts collectively as a nation to really job-generating investments. How do we make sure that foreigners who look at the Philippines, not from I call it a geo-economic point of view, that we are a strong ally and partner of certain countries. We tend to compete even with our own ASEAN neighbors, but we are stronger in terms of relationship with other countries that can generate investments. So why can't we focus our efforts on those countries, build on that, and internally our own conglomerates, businesses, or even multinationals existing already in the country, how can we help them grow in the economy? Because we have that market, nearly 120 million people. That's a dream for some countries to have that kind of market in place.
So much to capitalize on. Dino, you advise top conglomerates and multinationals about economic risk in the Philippines and more. What are you telling them now?
I'm always optimistic, maybe some would say. I always use the term cautiously optimistic, but you have to believe on the Filipino nation. And I always say, in spite of government. Young population, their skills or can be developed in terms of skills, critical resources. Third, we are in a strategic location. And Filipinos don't value that. When we say strategic location, we are in between what some would say the region that will grow the global economy, the Indo-Pacific region. When you look at the map, that's between Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. So if we can capitalize on those three core strengths of our country, maybe we can sustain this growth. And there are projections. I've seen it, data like Standard & Poor's projecting that we might be in the lower top 20 of economy of the world. IMF World Bank continues to see our economy growing, and maybe Marcos administration, if they get their act together, can end strong.
Well, there's a lot that we need to hurdle so that we can move forward on the business side. When we talk about, the cleanup of this administration and what we're trying to do to remove corruption, how do you think the government is doing? How would you rate the Marcos administration's efforts so far since the president's on us, since blowing the whistle on this mess?
For over 3 decades, I've focused on 2 words. I call it transparency and accountability. We need government to really be open and transparent. That's I've always advocated for open government so the public would know what we're doing.
Are they open enough? I mean, take a
Not
look at
enough.
the ICI.
Not enough. Maybe we need to institutionalize it. That's why there's always been this demand for freedom of information. We have seen reforms in the budget process, like open budget. We have seen that, and the public can actually look at where government will be spending.
Yeah.
The challenge is how government is spending it, that
Yeah.
means executing it. That's where the perception of corruption and cases of corruption.
We need visibility on that.
Yes.
Speaking of that, the corruption front, the ICI was created to investigate the flood control corruption. We're now down to one remaining commissioner, and following 2 resignations and ongoing questions about its mandate. From a market and governance standpoint, how serious is this? Would you say it's a credibility shock, the fact that the ICI is down to what it is now?
I think what we need to look forward to is there's a pending legislation, part of the priority legislation of both houses of government, which is institutionalizing a certain or a form of ICI. That means it will become now part of waives as an anti-corruption institution. Because I think we cannot blame the 2 resignations. These are private sector people having peaceful lives being brought to serve. Maybe they saw December as a time to go. And now, so we need to turn this into an actual mechanism, part of the state apparatus, part of the Philippine government apparatus, to institutionalize accountability. That they have to focus on big infrastructure issues. In this case, maybe start with flood control and make sure money allocated was spent and executed properly. And if not, use the other government institutions like the Ombudsman to run after, file charges, convict even. And that will tell people that accountability drives this government. Accountability drives the Marcos administration.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of the Marcos administration, 2028 is just around the corner. How much political capital does President Bongbong Marcos have today?
Quite sad that President Bongbong Marcos, he suffered a lot political capital during the 2025 election, maybe because of the arrest of former President Duterte, which was seen, I think, by the international community as something positive, but internally he had some political issues, was able to recover. And I would remind people that the data that we gathered, he nearly went back to where he was, nearly 50% as of July. But he brought this issue. He brought this issue of flood control corruption. Mahiyaman lang kayo. Maybe people are simply looking for, ipatupad mo yung pinangako mo. In this case, get people charged, arrested. Your report earlier about AMLA, we need to release those data. Because if it's really submitted already, it tells you that government system is functioning and looking for these corrupt activities that has happened. Because right now, only nearly 4 out of 10 Filipinos trust him. So he lacks the trust, and that's where political capital comes from, really.
On that note, it's not just him, it's the broader administration. There are talks of a cabinet revamp, although Malacanang has quashed those claims. Do you think at this junction, a cabinet revamp would help?
It would not help. It will create political instability. But if there are departments, that means a replacement or 1 or 2 that has failed in terms of being, I'll use the word responsive. Now what we need is responsive public services. If there are department secretaries who have failed to manage his department to be more responsive to the Filipino public, they should be replaced. But a massive changes or a request for courtesy resignation creates political instability. Entering a new year.
All right. And now we need stability. Anyway, that's all the time we have, Dindo. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for this time and opportunity.
We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's take a look at how global markets performed overnight. The S&P 500 ended lower on Wednesday, dragged down by declines in financial stocks. Meanwhile, Nvidia and Alphabet helped lift the Nasdaq as investors rotated into AI-related names. The drop in the S&P 500 came after the index hit an intraday record high earlier in the session.
We've had a pretty strong start to the year in 2026. Some of the things that had kind of fallen by the backside a little bit towards the end of the year, surged early to start this year. We've had a lot of kind of give and take. Start of a new year, start of a new month even can be a lot of just people repositioning, whether it's new money coming in that they're investing or just rebalancing. So we try not to read too much into it. I think the big picture here is we're off to a very strong start, but it's following a very strong couple of years.
Over in Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 closed lower on Wednesday, pausing after a recent run of record highs. Losses in energy and financial stocks weighed on the index, as markets also watched for any developments in the U.S.-Venezuela situation. Germany's DAX rose 0.9%, while France's CAC 40 edged slightly lower. Now let's check on how Asian markets are doing this morning. Right now, the Nikkei 225 is trading to the downside, down by 0.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index down by more, down by 1.3%. Shanghai's Composite in the red, not by much, down by less than 0.1% right now. And Singapore's Straits Times Index going the other way, up by 0.1% in early trade. Right now, the PSE Index, taking a look at our market, the PSE Index is up by 1.2% to 63.64. All shares index up as well, up by 0.7% to 36.21. Taking a look at these sub-indices, all are trading to the upside, except for the mining and oil counter down by 0.1%, while the services counter is up sharply, up by 2.4%. And the holding firms counter is up sharply as well, up by 1.2%. Now, total volume is thin at 65 million shares, valued at 686 million pesos. Market breadth is positive. We've got 86 advancers, 40 decliners, and 62 stocks unchanged. On the currency front, the peso opened at 59.30 against the dollar, up from its previous close of 59.35. Now, as trade flows slow and policy restrictions bite, the Bureau of Customs falls short of its revenue goal for a second straight year. BOC revenues missed the 2025 target by 2.53%, collecting 934.4 billion pesos in 2025. This is up 1.9% from 916.7 billion pesos in 2024, but still below the full-year target. The revenue shortfall is attributed to weaker import volumes. The government-imposed rice import ban, global commodity price volatility, and disruptions linked to the corruption investigations. BOC Commissioner Arnel Nepomuceno says that the agency is pushing a reform agenda focused on integrity, service, and trust. This includes initiatives such as the Isumbong kay Commissioner online reporting portal, enhanced digital services, and operational and infrastructure upgrades. Rice tariff collections plunged 60% year-on-year based on preliminary data from the Bureau of Customs, from 34 billion pesos in 2024 to just 13.7 billion pesos last year. The drop was widely expected after tariff cuts and the government's temporary rice import ban. Volumes and reduced tariff rates drove the revenue slump, even as the policy helped ease pressure on domestic rice prices. Looking ahead, the government is shifting to a more flexible rice tariff scheme, with imports set to resume at a higher 20% rate. The Department of Agriculture projects total rice imports in 2026 at between 3.6 and 3.8 million metric tons. Now, molasses, a key food input used in food, beverage, animal feed, and bioethanol, is now at the center of a government move to protect local producers after oversupply sent prices sharply lower. This has direct implications for companies that rely on molasses as a raw material or energy import. The Sugar Regulatory Administration issues Molasses Order Number 2, requiring importers to buy 3 kilos of molasses for every 1 kilo they import. Policy comes after molasses prices fell 56%, while inventories jumped 35% year-on-year to 460,000 metric tons, putting heavy pressure on local producers. For businesses, the rule effectively changes the cost math, raising input costs for importers and forcing a shift toward domestic supply. This affects pricing, procurement, strategy, and margins, particularly for food and beverage manufacturers and bioethanol players. The SRA says that the molasses import moratorium will remain in place until March 2026, with possible extensions depending on supply conditions. On another front, Cubans brace for a deepening economic crisis after the United States seizes 2 Venezuela-linked oil tankers, a move that threatens a critical energy lifeline for the island and adds volatility in global energy markets. Shuttered gas stations and long fuel lines in Matanzas highlight the fragility of Cuba's oil supply, with residents warning of more power cuts ahead. Cuba received about half of its oil from Venezuela last year, and locals say losing this supply would make daily life even harder. Any further disruption could add pressure to global oil prices and risk for energy importing economies like the Philippines. Now, no additional demands should be placed on Ukraine in the peace talks. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is urging Kiev's allies to step up pressure on Russia, particularly through tougher sanctions. Speaking in Nicosia at Cyprus, as Cyprus assumes the European nation's rotating presidency, Zelensky says Ukraine has met its obligations and should not be asked to accept any excessive or additional conditions. He also calls for faster progress on Ukraine's European Union membership talks and stronger collective measures against Moscow.
Sanctions on Russia, support for Ukraine, strengthening our defense together. All of this works for peace, of course, and we have discussed at the EU level within the coalition of the willing and in our bilateral work with Cyprus that sanctions need to be upgraded. A new package is being prepared and many steps are being taken to target Russia's shadow fleet, and this will work. Every dollar Russia loses is a dollar that does not fuel the aggressor.
And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us, and keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel.